Right, so your Unit 2 exam, you've got 4 learning outcomes that you need to know. And basically this is how the exam goes when you get there. So you've got an insert just like you do with Unit 1, but the insert is very, very different to what you get in Unit 1. And you are going to use this insert pretty much for the entire question paper. It's like your little hidden Bible that you're going to need all the way through. So what I recommend doing is with this particular insert, the best thing that you can do is immerse yourself in this whole situation that you're in. You've got to put yourself as if you are working for this company. Do it as if you've been given a job to do and you're getting paid for it and you work for this company. And that way it makes it a lot easier because you've got your whole like kind of mind working on this particular project. And then all the questions, you can keep referring back to this, specifically to this particular brief. So I recommend coming into the test, getting your insert, really familiarising yourself with it, pick out all the key bits of information, highlight anything that you know, annotate it, write little notes on the side so you know exactly what's going on before you even start. Right, as I go through this question paper, I'll show you exactly what I mean. So I've never seen this paper before, by the way. I thought it's best if I do it as if I'm in the test with you. So this paper, go to the first question. Identify 3 client requirements that have been given to Montage Digital Games. So there's different types of requirements for the clients that you've done. If you watch all the 4 videos on YouTube about the different learning outcomes, there's a section where it will tell you the different types of client requirements. The best type to look for are the explicit ones. So it's where it's really, really clear what you've been asked to do. That way you can't really get it wrong. So it's nice, easy 3 marks to start with. Client requirements that have been given to Montage Digital Games. If you look at what you've been asked to do, so first of all, this just gives you a little context, a little scenario of what that company does. Then the product brief. There's not actually a massive amount of detail here, just these few paragraphs. So you've got to pick out some client requirements for that. First one could be your target audience. So it tells you that if you write down one client requirement is target audience is children aged 7 to 10. There's 1 mark. You might write something else that's explicit is the deadline. So you could say it needs to be completed within 3 months. Another one that's really clear is here. App games should have images and sound effects. You can have anything like that and you can get the marks for it. So just look for something that's really obvious and explicit. You could have there, the app should be bright, colourful and engaging. So it just wants to know that you know what a requirement is and how to find them in the brief. That's a really simple start for you. Explain how one client requirement might impact on the work that Astrid must complete. So this is the bit where you get caught out a little bit. Obviously, before you write anything on the paper for the client requirements, look at the next question down because it does this on every exam paper. You need to put one of your 3 identified requirements as something that is going to affect this person here. So when you read about Astrid, you've got 3 members of staff here. Astrid is a graphic designer. So if you've got to think about one client requirement that's going to affect the graphic designer, you look for one that is related to that kind of area. So it says there the app should be bright, colourful and engaging. So if the app has got to be bright and colourful, that's going to affect the graphic designer because she needs to make sure that all the graphics she creates are bright and colourful and engaging in some way so that you've got some sort of images or pictures that the kids can relate to. So you just explain that one particular requirement, but they need to match up. So as long as you've put bright, colourful, engaging as one of these, you can then talk about it underneath. Explain 2 ways that Justin and Astrid might work together to plan the project. So you've got 6 marks there. Again, if you put yourself into this situation, it makes everything a lot easier. So if you look at what Astrid does, she's a graphic designer. And look at what Justin does. He's the researcher and writer of gaming narratives. So you've got to think about, right, if I'm Justin, If I'm going to be doing a load of research and writing game narratives, so the story behind the game and actual factual content, how can I work together with the graphic designer? So you've got to carefully think about what exactly you're going to do to work together. So graphic designer and a writer. So the best thing to do, put yourself in their situation. So when you've read through the whole thing, so just paused it there so I can read through the whole context. Essentially what they're making is a game which is related to kings and queens in Tudor England. So this is where you've got to refer back to the actual product brief, and that's where people miss out on loads of marks. So you might say, oh, well, they could do this and they could do this to work together, but you've got to be really specific. So it says here, Astrid's been successful in creating memorable icons and characters for games in the past. So they've got quite a bit of experience there, but she's not going to know what she's doing. She's not going to know what she's going to create at all. And Justin might not have any idea of what's actually possible to do when you're making a game. So because it says it's going to feature key information about kings and queens, you could put that in as a specific example. So you could say Astrid could work with Justin because she needs to know what kings and what queens that she's going to create as the actual icons and characters. Because Justin is doing factual content, you could also put something about the factual content and mention something about Tudor England. So you could say what kind of costumes and clothing did they wear during that time. So in other words, you need to pick out the key job roles that both people are doing and just think about how they could actually help each other. You could obviously do it the other way around as well and say that Astrid could supply information about what is actually possible to create, or because it says she's been successful in the past, she could show some of her successful work to Justin and see what he thinks of her ideas. Because it's 6 marks, you need to kind of say what they can do together, explain it a little bit, and put the actual specific example from the brief in there. And that's where loads of people miss marks. They don't put something actually from here. Right, number 3, identify 2 legal or ethical issues. Now, all these exam papers are the same. They start off like that with the 3 client requirements. Then they go on to how that could impact or how you could overcome it. Then it's got something about the job roles, and then it's got something about the legal and ethical issues. So 2 legal or ethical issues that the team will need to think about when working on the development of the app. Explain why they require consideration. So you can't just put 2 legal issues and that's it. You've got to put what they are, why they need to kind of consider them, and put that into like full sentences to get you 6 marks. So let's have a look. 2 legal or ethical issues. So first of all, the thing that stands out to me is that they're 7 to 10 years old. So the audience is 7 to 10 years old. So one legal issue is they need to consider PEGI. So PEGI are the regulatory body that basically give a game a certificate, and they need to meet those requirements. So they've got to think about not putting any unsuitable content in there. So that's one legal issue, and I guess it's an ethical issue as well, because you don't want it to see inappropriate content. So you can have both in there. I would say PEGI and say the inappropriate content, and to make sure that it's suitable for 7 to 10 year olds. And then an actual legal issue is not to use any copyrighted information. So copyright is one that you can put in for every single case study, because they're a media company and they're going to be creating something. So if they need to make sure they follow copyright, make sure they don't breach that law. So don't just put copyright, say they need to follow the copyright law, therefore they cannot copy other people's existing work. This is important so that they don't later on get sued by another person. Explain one way that one of the above issues might be resolved by the team. So you can resolve the ethical issue of their age, 7 to 10. You could do that through audience testing, maybe check with the parents whether they think that the content is suitable, something like that. One way that you can resolve copyright, which is what you should always be able to put in, is to keep an asset log. If you keep an asset log of all the images and stuff that you've used, any sound effects, any videos, then you can later contact all the owners of those particular assets and just make sure that you've got permission to use them. Another way that you could do it is to just not use anything that's a secondary source. Just create everything from scratch. Question 4. Information will need to be researched to ensure the historical facts are accurate. Identify 2 secondary sources you could use to research historical information and explain how you can ensure that each source is reliable. So that little last bit's a bit of a tricky one, isn't it? But you can kind of get around that. It's quite simply. So 2 secondary sources that you could use to research historical information, explain how you can ensure that each source is reliable. So what you need to know here is your secondary sources, all the different possible options that you can have. And we did this for Unit 1 and Unit 2. So you should be pretty clear on this by now that you can have different secondary sources. So the most obvious one is the internet. Now the only thing with the internet is you've got to explain how you can ensure that each source is reliable. So what you've got to think about is you can use the internet, but is the stuff that you're getting on the internet always reliable? Now we know that that isn't the case, but if you get it from certain websites, then it would be. So if we're researching historical information, if you use some sort of like educational website, or maybe like BBC Bitesize or just BBC in general, then you know that that source is going to be pretty much reliable because it's what's used to teach students in school. So that's one thing that you could put down. You could say using the internet or using web pages on the internet for your first mark. Then you could say what they're using. So to research historical websites such as BBC Bitesize. And then you could say you could ensure that that source is reliable because it's a trustworthy non-profit public service organisation, so you know that the stuff on there is reliable. Then most people would struggle after that and think, well, what else can you do? Obviously, because it's history, you could use a textbook. If you use a textbook that's going to be used in school and you know that the author of that textbook is trustworthy, so you know that the source is reliable. Identify one method of primary research. So this is things that you carry out yourself. So it's not using anything that already exists, it's you doing it yourself. So we know that the main things for this are surveys, interviews and focus groups. So you could do any of those things really and just talk about how that is appropriate. So identify one method of primary research that you could use to research information about the design of the app and explain why this might be appropriate. Again, you want to try and relate it back to the original product brief. So what you've got to think about is, what are you actually looking for? You're looking about kings and queens in Tudor England, and it's got to be appropriate for children. So one way that you could make sure that your information is suitable is to ask the children themselves. Best way of doing this, obviously students of the age of 7 to 10 are not going to be the best at filling in surveys. The most appropriate would probably be a focus group, because an interview, you know, it's a lot of hard work just to get the opinions of one kid. If you do a focus group, you could get a number of different kids' feedback all at once, and you can ask them, you know, positives and negatives, and get them to talk about what they think about your ideas as well. Next question. Explain one way the team can gain feedback. Isn't it just asked that? One method of primary research. I haven't even read the question properly. You could use to research information about the design of the app and explain why this might be appropriate. So it's about the design. So method of primary research could be carry out surveys about the designs. So you could create some designs and ask people some quantitative data about what they think of the design. So you could show like 2 different versions, say which one do you prefer. You could show them different designs and say what do you grade this out of 10. That would give you like a load of quantitative data that would help you kind of see on a really quick level on graphs and all that kind of stuff about whether that particular design is okay or not. And then I've kind of answered the next question without even reading it. Explain one way the team can gain feedback about the design and content. You could do a focus group for that, and you've got to explain how they would do that. So it's to gather a number of people from the audience. So it could be parents, you could just have the children, whatever you want to do, and you're going to get really good qualitative feedback from that because they can give you positives and negatives while they're there. Then we're moving on to the team will need to create a plan for content. Identify one planning tool that Astrid could use to communicate her initial design ideas and evaluate the effectiveness of this compared to one other planning tool. So what you've got to think about is all the different pre-production planning documents that you've done, but ones that you do more towards the start. So obviously this is the design of an app. So you've got to think about what you do for kind of like a website or an app. What kind of pre-production planning tools do you do for that? Now we know you don't do a script necessarily, although you might do for some of the narratives, and you don't do storyboards because that's more for a video. So you've got to think about the other ones. You could do something like, this is initial design ideas, so you could do a visualization diagram, you could do a wireframe, you could do a page mock-up, any of those things. But I think for ideas, you want to think more along the lines of a mood board or a mind map. So I would go with a mind map and then evaluate it against the mood board. That's probably the easiest thing to do. Or you can evaluate it against the visualization diagram. So you need to talk, because it's 8 marks, you're going to have to say what it is for kind of one mark to identify it. Then kind of explain how, or evaluate how effective it is. So what are all the good and bad points of using a mind map compared to another one? It's quite a difficult question really for 8 marks when you think about it, but let's have a go. So if we identify a mind map, there's your 1 mark. You could say a mind map is a tool used where you have your central idea and lots of other ideas branching out. It kind of shows the development of all your different ideas, so you could have things coming off it. This is where you want to put specific examples related to this. So if you're doing something for a game for 7 to 10 year olds, you need to think about what's going to be in it. So you need to think about like how the game's going to work. You need to think about what characters are going to be in it. You need to think about how it's going to give feedback to the kids. You need to think any music that might be in it, any sound effects, all those kind of things that are going to be in it. So we've got to evaluate how effective that is. What's good about a mind map? It's easy to do. It shows you all your different ideas in the full context. It allows you to expand on ideas and add further branches coming out. The disadvantage of a mind map is it can be quite time consuming to create, whilst at the same time doesn't necessarily show what it might look like in the final stages. So you could compare that to another planning tool. You could say a mood board, and a mood board would be good because you can show all the images that might be that kind of style. You could put color schemes on there. You could have text or titles, fonts that you might use, all that kind of stuff could go on a mood board, which might be a little bit more effective to show people what you're thinking with your design ideas. The disadvantage of a mood board is obviously it doesn't show much context into like the characters and the narrative and that kind of stuff that goes on. So you've just got to, my advice is to break down that question into different sections and just have a go one at a time. So it's basically 3 questions in one. Identify a planning tool. You can get a mark for anything like mind map, visualization diagram, mood board. And then you split the next question. So it's evaluate the effectiveness of this one. So whichever one you've just said, say the good and bad points about it. And then compare to another one. So you need to say the good and bad points about another one. Next question. Two regulatory bodies should be pretty straightforward. You need to think about two different things. Now, the obvious one is because this is a game, we need to think about PEGI, which you've already mentioned a little bit earlier on. PEGI are the regulatory body that decide what certificate to make a game, what age is it appropriate for. So your first part of the question, again, if you split it up, is to identify the regulatory bodies. So we could go with PEGI, and we'll go with ASA, but I'll explain why in a second. So PEGI, explain why it's relevant to the client requirements. So PEGI is the regulatory body for games. This is relevant because we are making an educational game. We need to make sure that they do not have content that is inappropriate for that age. Next regulatory body, I'm going to go with ASA, because if you go through all the different ones we've covered, it's not going to be BBFC because it's not a film. It's not going to be W3C because it's not a website, it's an app. So you go through all of them. It's not PRS, it's got nothing to do with music. So the only ones left really, Advertising Standards Agency. If you put ASA in, think about the game itself, and it might have it might have adverts in it. So any adverts that are in it, you could say that they need to make sure that they don't have false advertising, they don't have any inappropriate adverts that are in the game. You could also go from another perspective and say that you're going to make sure that when you advertise the game yourself, you don't have any false advertisements in there. You make sure that you stick to the rules of advertising. So far, before we've even got up to any of the design questions, this paper is almost identical to all of the others. It follows the same structure. Client requirements, how does that affect this particular thing? How do the staff members work together, or how can they contribute something? Legal and ethical issues, how can you resolve them? Sources of information, so primary and secondary. Getting feedback, so primary sources for focus groups and surveys. Planning documents, and regulatory bodies. Now it comes on to section B, which is your 8-mark questions and your extended answer. So this is where you've got to create documents yourself. This is basically learning outcome 3 and 4. You need to know what the actual documents are and how to create them. The main thing that people lose marks on is this: use of annotations to justify your decisions. Also, people sometimes lose them for fitness for purpose, because you've got to make sure that you've met what is in this particular client brief. Okay, so you've been asked by, what's that? Is that a name? Harris, to design a level of the app game so that he is able to see the design ideas that you and the rest of the team have been working on. In the space provided, use a mind map to design a level of the app game. You must show you've considered the client requirements. That's the key part there. So use a mind map. It's basically told you one of the answers to the question before. So if you were struggling for a pre-production document, look ahead and there's one there. Use a mind map. You will show you have considered the client requirements. So we're going to make a mind map for a level of the app game. It sounds easy to do a mind map because you're just kind of starting with a central document, aren't you, and putting stuff around it. The difficult part is what to put in it. So what is the content going to be? It's for one level, so you've got to look through here for clues of how it's going to work. Saying it could be accessed by a tablet and smartphone, so it's going to be touchscreen. The app game should feature key information about kings and queens in Tudor England. Children can learn and practice important names and dates in history. So when it comes to content, you're going to have to start with something in the middle, some sort of central node. So that could just be level. Then you could have arrows coming off it. So you're going to need something for characters. Characters, you could have kings and queens. Coming off that, you could have important names. You could have dates coming off it. You could also have images to be used, sound effects to be used, And you just need to think about what kind of stuff. So if it's going to be music, what sort of music can you have for Tudor England? You could just put like music from the time period. Then you could have sound effects. You could have like people talking. You could have voiceovers. You could have maybe like sound effects for when they get a question right and a sound effect for when they get a question wrong. All that kind of stuff is your content, and it makes it fit for purpose if you pick out particular things in here. So in your mind map, if you put colour scheme, and then from colour scheme you've put bright, colourful, engaging, then you know that you've met something specifically from here. Basically, you can pick up marks ridiculously easy just by picking out the things that are supposed to go in there and putting them into a mind map. The bit where you lose marks is if you don't justify what you've done. So when the mind map is completed, for each little point, justify what you're doing. So colour scheme, bright, colourful. Underneath, you justify it and say it needs to be bright and colourful because it's specified in the client brief, and obviously young children will be more interested in bright colours. Okay. Next one is ask for an early draft of the home screen of the app. In the space provided, create a visualization diagram of the home page. Now, the best thing about visualization diagrams is there's no like real clear thing of what it should look like. It's completely up to you. For this one, because it's an app, you probably want to start with some sort of square shape that resembles the screen. Once you've got that, you can just think about what is the home screen going to have on it. So think about any game that you've played. What does the main menu look like? So you've got to look at what the game is actually entailing. What can you actually do? So it's saying Kings and Queens in Tudor England. You could have one button like learn about kings, one button learn about queens. You could have one button important names. You could have one button important dates. So there's 4 little sections that you could have from the home screen. Other stuff you could have is like a little picture, maybe a little picture of a person in Tudor kind of clothing. You don't expect you to draw that, but you can draw a stick man and draw an arrow to it and say character wearing Tudor England clothing. You could put arrows to stuff saying these will be brightly coloured. This background will be an engaging image, such as a picture of Tudor England. Anything like that is your content. Your layout just needs to be kind of a structured, simple layout that makes sense. So over all your menu buttons in one little group, for example, could either be across the bottom, down the left hand side, anything like that. Your buttons should be quite big and easy to press because they're for young children. So you have big buttons on it and then say these buttons are larger so they are easy to click. So on this one, it doesn't actually say that you've got to justify your decisions, but do it anyway. It just makes it easier for you to do it. So when you're talking about content and layout and fitness for purpose, if you explain what you're doing, it makes it a lot easier and you don't have to be as good at drawing. Then you'll be greeted with this lovely 18-mark question at the end just to polish it off. And it's always to evaluate something. So all you've got to do is say all of the good points and all of the bad points. But what you want to do is try and refer it back to the actual app. Okay, so you need to put specific things in to do with the app. So in this one, it's talking about a production schedule. So first of all, if you know all of Learning Outcome 3 and 4 and you watch the videos on them, you'll know what a production schedule is, you'll know what it looks like, you'll know how to draw one, and you'll know the advantages and disadvantages because it's all in there. So a production schedule is essentially a task list with a load of key dates and times across the top. And the idea is so that you can plan out how long you're going to spend on each task and hopefully make sure you get it done within the 3 months. So you've got to think about what would actually be involved in creating this app, and that's going to be your task list. And you've got to evaluate what's good about doing that. So you need to think about what's effective, what's good of using a production schedule and go through those points. So you could start by saying something like, a production schedule is a list of a list of tasks with times and key dates and milestones across the top. Each task will have a given time period which it should be completed in. This will make it easier for everyone involved to see what task they are up to and whether they are on track. You could put something like, mention these by name. So you could say Harris, Astrid and Justin will be able to all refer to the production schedule to know what they need to do and when they need to complete it. This will be an advantage because all 3 members of staff will know where they are up to and when they need to be done by. You could talk about how you can use a production schedule to adjust your timescales. Something might not be going according to plan, so you give yourself slightly longer to do it and see where later on in the line you might be able to make the time back. You could talk about specific things from like specific tasks, like the researcher could be first. You want to research stuff so you know how much information to get. You could write the game narrative. While you're writing the game narrative, Astrid could be working on the graphics. You could talk about how Harris is responsible for the game actual design. He can't really start doing anything until these guys have finished doing the design work. So you could talk about all of that specifically as part of the production schedule. The more that you put stuff out of here and write it into your evaluation, the more marks you're going to get. It even says there you may refer to the specifics. So if you talk about a task list and say these are some of the tasks that might get completed, these are the orders it might be completed in, you're going to get marks. Because it's evaluate, you need to talk about the drawbacks as well. So you could say the time taken to create a production schedule is going to be quite a big investment of time. You could say that not everything always goes according to plan, so it could be like a kind of added stress to the 3 members of staff involved. You could say that having strict deadlines makes Astrid and Justin rush through all the design stage, and Harris might have to try and code a game with not the best resources and assets. Anything like that, you're not expected to write like ridiculous amounts to get 18 marks. You just have to argue both sides and pick out particular bits from there. Now, you basically, I think out of 9 out of 10 of the exams have all been a document, and it was just the one last January where it was evaluate the effectiveness of audience research, and that kind of threw everyone off a little bit. So I pretty much guarantee that they're going to go back to doing a document. So you need to know the full list of documents that you need to create and the good and bad points about each one, and remember to pick out those little bits from the client brief. That's the whole exam paper. So when you actually think about it, it's not that difficult. You need 40 out of 80 to get a merit. So if you take your time drawing the diagrams, don't spend ages doing fancy artwork, just get your annotations in. Don't just annotate and go, this is a title. Say, I have put a title here because this, this and this. Try to justify related to the client brief itself. So I have chosen this colour scheme because it says here, bright, colourful and engaging. Always refer back to there. This document should be your best friend in the test.